Imagine stepping into the grandest chamber of an ancient palace, your footsteps echoing through a space that feels both immense and impossibly enclosed. As your eyes adjust to the dim light, you realize something is profoundly wrong. This room has no doors, no windows, no visible entrance or exit. You're standing in what should be the heart of power, yet you're completely cut off from the outside world. This isn't some forgotten corner or storage room. This is the throne room, the sacred chamber, the center of royal authority, and it's hermetically sealed from the world it's meant to command. This architectural paradox appears across ancient civilizations, from the sun-baked temples of Egypt to the jungle-shrouded pyramids of Mesoamerica, from the fortified palaces of Mycenaean to the lavish courts of Persia. Everywhere humanity built centers of power, we find these windowless wonders, these doorless chambers that defy our modern understanding of space and accessibility. Why would the most powerful people in the world deliberately design their most important rooms to be physically inaccessible? What possible purpose could such isolation serve when power typically demands visibility and presence? Today, we're embarking on an extraordinary journey to unravel one of history's most fascinating architectural mysteries. We'll explore how these sealed spaces weren't architectural oversights but deliberate tools of control, spaces that symbolized divine authority, protected sacred knowledge, and manipulated human perception to reinforce royal power. We'll walk through forgotten palaces where whispers still echo off stone walls, decode symbolic designs that spoke a language of power understood by few, and uncover the psychological strategies that made these windowless chambers instruments of awe and obedience. By the time we're done, you'll never look at ancient architecture the same way again. You'll see beyond the stone and mortar to the brilliant, calculating minds that understood how to shape space to shape human behavior. Prepare to have everything you thought you knew about royal spaces transformed. To truly grasp the power of these sealed chambers, we need to step into the mindset of the ancient world, where the physical and spiritual realms were deeply intertwined. In this worldview, seclusion wasn't about hiding away in weakness. It was about concentrating a potent, almost dangerous form of power. Imagine a sacred object, a divine statue, or the person of the ruler themselves. These were not just symbols of authority, but vessels containing immense spiritual energy. This energy needed to be contained, protected, and carefully managed, much like we might handle a radioactive substance today in a lead-lined room. An open, accessible space would allow this power to leak out, to become diluted and ineffective, or worse, to fall into the wrong hands. The windowless, doorless room acted as a spiritual containment vessel, ensuring that the potent force within remained pure, undiluted by the outside world, and under the absolute control of the elite few who were permitted to access it. This concept of sacred seclusion finds one of its most powerful expressions in the heart of ancient Egyptian religion. Deep within the sprawling temple complexes at Karnak or Luxor, past towering pylons and columned halls teeming with priests, lay the most sacred space of all, the naos or inner sanctuary. This room was typically small, utterly dark, and sealed from the outside world. Here, the statue of the god resided, believed to be the actual dwelling place of the deity's spirit. Only the highest-ranking priest, and occasionally the Pharaoh, who was himself a living god, could enter this chamber. Their entry was not a simple walk through a door. It was a meticulously choreographed ritual. They might have accessed it through a narrow, hidden passageway or by temporarily removing a blocking stone. Once inside, illuminated only by the flickering light of a single oil lamp, the priest would perform the daily ritual of clothing, feeding, and anointing the god's statue. This intimate act of service sustained the cosmos itself, maintaining the divine order of the universe. The complete sensory deprivation of that space, the absence of outside light, sound, and air, would have made the experience profoundly intense and otherworldly for the participant. It physically manifested the belief that interacting with the divine was not a casual or communal event, but a rare, privileged, and terrifyingly powerful transaction. This architectural strategy of using inaccessibility to denote supreme importance was by no means unique to Egypt. Across the Mediterranean, in the Minoan palace of Knossos on Crete, archaeologists discovered similarly baffling structures known as Lustral basins. These were small, rectangular rooms sunken below floor level, reachable only by a single flight of stairs. Crucially, they had no doors. Once you descended the stairs, you were in a space that was completely enclosed. While their exact purpose is still debated, the prevailing theory is that they were used for purification rituals before entering even more sacred areas of the palace, or perhaps for initiation rites. The act of descending into this sunken, inaccessible space marked a physical and spiritual transition, separating the pure from the impure, the initiated from the uninitiated. This physical separation was a powerful metaphor that reinforced social and spiritual hierarchies. It communicated a clear message: what happens here is not for everyone. It is too complex, too holy, too dangerous for the common person to witness or understand. This deliberate mystery was a primary tool of control. By creating a space that was off-limits, the ruling class cultivated an aura of unapproachable authority. They weren't just politicians or wealthy landowners. They were the sole mediators between the human population and the capricious forces of the divine that governed harvests, weather, and fate. Their unique access to these sealed chambers proved their unique status. The architecture itself argued that they alone could navigate these dangerous spiritual waters on behalf of their people. The stone walls were a silent, permanent proclamation of their exclusive right to rule, a right granted not by popular vote but by the gods themselves, etched into the very blueprint of their power. What's truly astonishing is that this architectural language of power was being spoken simultaneously across the globe by cultures that had no possible contact with one another. It's as if the very concept of supreme authority demanded a physical expression of seclusion, a universal principle discovered and implemented independently from the Aegean Sea to the jungles of Central America. Let's journey to the citadel of Mycenae in ancient Greece, where massive stone walls protected the legendary rulers of the Bronze Age. Here, we find the magnificent Tholos tombs, often called beehive tombs for their soaring, domed interiors. The most famous, the Treasury of Atreus, presents a grand, imposing entranceway that leads not to an open hall, but to a vast, completely enclosed circular chamber buried deep within a hillside. This was the final resting place of a king, a space designed to be sealed for eternity. Once the massive stone door was swung shut and the entrance passage filled with earth, the chamber became a perfect, impenetrable stone egg, isolating the ruler's remains and his grave goods from the world of the living. This wasn't just a tomb, it was a powerful statement of a dynasty's permanence, its separation from the common people even in death, and its control over wealth that would follow it into the afterlife. Meanwhile, on the other side of the world, the Maya were constructing their own versions of power containers, deep within the towering stone pyramids of cities like Palenque or Tikal. Maya architects designed small, windowless sanctums to house the tombs of their divine kings. The tomb of the great ruler Pakal inside the Temple of the Inscriptions at Palenque is a masterclass in this concept. To reach his burial chamber, one would have had to descend a long, narrow, hidden staircase that was meticulously filled with rubble after his interment. His body was laid to rest in a massive, intricately carved sarcophagus within a sealed vault, surrounded by precious offerings. The entire pyramid was in effect a monumental locking mechanism for this single, sacred room. The message was clear: the king's connection to the gods and the cosmic sources of his power were too potent to be left accessible. They required a mountain of stone to contain and protect them. This pattern repeats in the vast palaces of Persia. At the heart of the magnificent Adyton at Persepolis, the great audience hall where the King of Kings would receive tribute from across his empire, were smaller, more intimate throne rooms and private chambers. These spaces, reserved for the most important meetings and deliberations, were often designed with controlled, limited access points, creating a series of thresholds that filtered visitors based on their status. The further in one went, the more enclosed and exclusive the spaces became. This architectural filtering process physically reinforced the Persian court's rigid hierarchy. A foreign ambassador might see the grand public hall, but only the most trusted advisors would ever lay eyes on the windowless inner council chamber where true power resided. Even in ancient China, a civilization with a distinct architectural tradition, we find a powerful echo of this principle. Emperors of the Han and later dynasties constructed special, dark halls or secluded temples for the critical practice of ancestor veneration. In these quiet, often dimly lit rooms, shielded from the distractions of the outside world, the emperor would perform rituals to communicate with his imperial predecessors. This was not a public ceremony. It was a private, sacred dialogue between the living ruler and the source of his mandate of heaven. The seclusion of the space was essential, framing the communication as a direct, unmediated, and privileged line to the divine, a conversation that would determine the fate of the entire empire, and one that no ordinary person could ever witness. From the funeral mounds of Mycenae to the pyramidal crypts of the Maya, from the filtered chambers of Persia to the quiet, dark halls of China, we see a brilliant and consistent architectural strategy. Despite vast differences in language, religion, and material, these diverse cultures all understood that to concentrate power, you must first contain it. They used stone and mortar to build literal and metaphorical barriers, creating spaces that were physically separate to signify a power that was categorically different. This independent, global convergence on the same architectural solution reveals a profound and universal truth about human psychology and the nature of authority itself. But the power of these sealed chambers went far beyond mere symbolism or social control. It was believed to be a practical, even scientific necessity for the most sacred rituals themselves. Ancient religions often operated on a principle that might seem foreign to us today. That divine energy was a tangible force that could be concentrated, contained, and even dissipated. In the bustling, sun-drenched courtyards of a Mesopotamian ziggurat, the air was thick with the smell of incense and the sounds of 100 different activities. But high atop that massive stepped pyramid, reached only by a single, arduous staircase, was a small, windowless temple, the dwelling place of the city's patron god. This was not a place for public worship. Inside, in the cool, silent, and motionless air, the high priest would perform the daily rituals of offering food, drink, and prayers to the divine statue. The belief was that the deity's presence literally inhabited the statue, and that this presence required a controlled environment. An open window or a drafty hall wouldn't just be uncomfortable. It was thought to scatter and weaken the divine essence, making the ritual ineffective and potentially angering the god. The sealed room acted as a sacred battery, locking in this potent spiritual charge to ensure the community's continued prosperity and protection. This concept of concentrating supernatural power finds another fascinating expression at the Oracle of Delphi in Greece. The Pythia, the priestess who served as the mouthpiece of the god Apollo, did not deliver her prophecies in an open-air temple. She descended into a lower chamber known as the Adyton. Historical and geological evidence suggests this room was partially subterranean and notably enclosed. Ancient sources describe a peculiar sweet smell and intoxicating vapors rising from a fissure in the rock, vapors that were essential to inducing the Pythia's trance-like state. The enclosed nature of this space was absolutely critical. It prevented these faint gaseous emissions from dispersing on the wind, allowing them to concentrate to a level potent enough to facilitate her divine connection. Open windows would have diluted the very source of the prophecy, rendering the entire process void. Furthermore, the seclusion shielded her from the anxious gaze of the supplicants waiting outside. Imagine the psychological pressure of delivering a prophecy that could send a king to war or halt the construction of a city. The enclosed room protected her from this external pressure, allowing her to focus entirely on the divine message. These spaces were far more than just rooms. They were psychological and spiritual airlocks, crossing the threshold from the bright, noisy, familiar outside world into the silent, dark, and often strangely scented interior was a profound sensory shock. This sudden shift in environment was deliberately engineered to alter the participant's state of consciousness. The absence of familiar sensory landmarks, the sun's position in the sky, the sound of birds, the feeling of a breeze, created a feeling of timelessness and disorientation. This made the individual highly suggestible and open to a transcendent experience, whether they were the priest performing the ritual or an initiate witnessing it. It signaled in the most visceral way possible that the normal rules of reality were suspended. You were now in a place where God spoke, where the future was revealed, and where the fate of the world could be decided. The purity of the ritual act was paramount. In the eyes of ancient practitioners, a ceremony witnessed by the uninitiated or conducted in a space exposed to the elements wasn't just less effective, it was contaminated. A stray thought from an unbeliever, a sudden noise from the outside, or even an unexpected beam of sunlight could break the concentration of the participants and sever the delicate connection to the divine. The windowless, doorless sanctuary guaranteed that the ritual's mystical impact remained undiluted and its power preserved exclusively for those it was intended to benefit. This absolute need for ritual integrity and unobserved practice naturally makes us wonder about the practicalities. If there were no conventional doors, how did anyone get in or out without compromising the sacred seal? This precise control over entry and exit transformed architecture into a powerful tool for information management. Beyond safeguarding physical treasures, these sealed spaces protected something even more valuable: knowledge. In cultures where literacy was limited to a privileged elite, the rituals, discussions, and decisions that occurred within these chambers constituted state secrets of the highest order. By physically restricting access, rulers ensured that only vetted individuals could witness the often messy and human mechanics of governance, preserving the illusion of divinely inspired, flawless judgment. The Inca provide a masterful example of this principle with their kolka, or storage houses, built into hillsides. Some of these structures featured a single, small opening high on the wall, accessible only by a removable ladder. A designated official would climb up, pull the ladder after them, and distribute goods like maize, textiles, or weapons from within. Once finished, they would descend and remove the ladder, leaving the remaining stores in an impregnable, windowless vault. This wasn't just pragmatic logistics, it was a brilliant display of economic control. The ruler, through his administrators, literally held the key to survival and wealth, making the entire population dependent on his controlled generosity. The theatrical potential of this controlled access was not lost on ancient leaders. A doorway is a predictable, constant feature, but a ruler who appears from behind a seemingly solid wall or descends mysteriously from an opening in a ceiling is performing a miracle. The pharaoh in the Great Pyramid might have used a series of counterweights to make a massive limestone block slide silently aside, revealing his presence in a cloud of incense at the perfect dramatic moment. In Minoan Crete, the priest-king may have entered the central court of the palace from a hidden staircase beneath the floor, emerging as if from the earth itself during a ceremonial bull-leaping ritual. These staged appearances were designed to short-circuit rational thought and evoke awe. A leader who doesn't use doors doesn't play by the rules of ordinary men. He transcends the physical limitations of his subjects, reinforcing a narrative of supernatural origin and omnipotence. This manipulation of perception extended to the very knowledge of how these spaces were used. The average person might know the sealed chamber existed, but its contents and activities remained a subject of fearful speculation. Was it filled with gold? Did it contain a magical artifact? Were terrible rituals performed inside? This uncertainty was a potent weapon. It allowed the ruler to cultivate a public image tailored to different audiences, be it benevolent father, fearsome warrior, or infallible priest, without the risk of contradictory evidence leaking from his inner sanctum. The mystery itself became a form of social control, keeping potential rivals guessing and the general populace in a state of obedient wonder. By mastering the narrative of access, ancient powers didn't just protect their treasures, they protected their mythos, ensuring their authority remained as unchallengeable and enigmatic as the sealed stone walls of their most private chambers. Now consider the experience from the perspective of a visitor granted the immense privilege of entering one of these sealed chambers. After navigating a labyrinth of corridors, passing armed guards, and perhaps even undergoing ritual purification, you are finally led into the ruler's presence. The heavy curtain or stone block slides shut behind you, and you are plunged into a world utterly unlike the one outside. The first thing you notice is the absolute silence, broken only by the crackle of a torch or the sound of your own heartbeat thumping in your ears. Then the disorientation sets in. With no windows, you have no reference point. Is it day or night? How long have you been here? Which way is out? This sensory deprivation is a powerful psychological lever. Your brain, starved of its usual inputs, becomes hyper-focused on the only thing in the environment, the ruler. Every word they speak, every slight movement they make, is magnified in importance. You are primed for influence, your critical faculties dampened by a deep, primal unease. This was no accident. It was environmental engineering designed for maximum psychological impact. In the hypogeum of the Persian palace at Persepolis, for instance, a subject granted an audience with the King of Kings would find themselves in a relatively small, windowless hall. The ceiling, supported by thick, close-set columns, would feel low and heavy. The air, still and perfumed with exotic incense, would be a stark contrast to the dry heat outside. The only light came from flickering oil lamps, casting dramatic, dancing shadows that made the massive carved reliefs of conquering heroes and mythical beasts seem to move on the walls. In this chiaroscuro world, the king himself, adorned in gold and jewels, would be strategically illuminated, appearing less like a man and more like a living statue of a god. Your eyes would have no choice but to fixate on him, and in the echoing quiet, his whispered words would feel as if they were spoken directly into your soul. This overwhelming sensory experience was carefully curated to make you feel small, vulnerable, and utterly subordinate, ensuring that any request from the throne would be met with immediate, unquestioning compliance. The architecture itself was a silent participant in the theater of power, a co-conspirator in the psychological subjugation of every person who crossed its threshold. Beyond the powerful psychological effects of silence and darkness, ancient architects wielded another invisible tool with masterful precision: sound itself. In these windowless chambers, the very nature of acoustics was transformed. Without openings for noise to escape, every sound was trapped, bouncing off hard, smooth stone surfaces to create bizarre and otherworldly auditory effects. A simple whisper could travel unnervingly clear across a vast room, seeming to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. A single footstep could produce a cascade of echoes, making a lone individual sound like an approaching army. This wasn't an accidental byproduct of the design. It was a calculated feature, an auditory layer of control that turned these spaces into sophisticated instruments of awe. We can hear echoes of this ancient audio engineering in the great ball courts of the Maya. These long, eye-shaped courtyards, flanked by towering, sloping walls, were far more than sporting arenas. They were deeply ritualistic spaces where the symbolic battle between life and death was played out, often culminating in human sacrifice. The acoustics there are famously peculiar. A person standing at one end of the court and speaking in a normal voice can be heard with perfect clarity at the opposite end, hundreds of feet away, a phenomenon known as the whispering gallery effect. For the crowds gathered to witness the ritual ball game, the players' movements and the priest's chants would have been amplified and distorted by the architecture, imbuing the entire ceremony with a supernatural soundtrack. The sounds seemed disconnected from their human sources, appearing instead as disembodied voices from the spirit world, approving or condemning the actions unfolding below. This mastery of sound reached its zenith in the subterranean depths of Egyptian tombs. Deep within the Great Pyramid, the so-called King's Chamber is a stark, granite-lined box, completely isolated from the outside world by tons of stone and complex internal architecture. In such a space, sound behaves in strange ways. The low, resonant frequency of the chamber itself can amplify certain tones while muffling others. A chant or a rhythmic beat would not just be heard, it would be felt viscerally, vibrating through the chest and bones of anyone present. Egyptologists and acoustic engineers have theorized that priests may have used specific chants or harmonic frequencies during burial rituals, their voices amplified and sustained by the room's natural resonance. This would create an overwhelming sensory experience for the elite mourners permitted inside, convincing them that the ritual was successfully bridging the gap between the earthly and the divine, and that the pharaoh's soul was being launched into the afterlife on a wave of sacred sound. The strategic use of this sonic power was a brilliant psychological tool. A ruler delivering a pronouncement in such an environment didn't just speak with authority. Their voice was physically transformed by the space around them. It gained reverberation, depth, and a lingering presence that a human voice alone could never achieve. For an oracle delivering a prophecy like the Pythia at Delphi, the echoing whispers and strange acoustics of her enclosed chamber would have made her fragmented utterances feel like the multifaceted voice of the god himself, speaking from all directions at once. This auditory manipulation made the message unforgettable and its source unquestionable. The words weren't just processed by the mind, they were experienced by the entire body, felt in the pit of the stomach as much as they were understood by the brain. By controlling the sonic environment, ancient elites ensured that their most important communications were not only received but were literally resonant. leaving a lasting physical and psychological impression that mere words in an open field could never hope to achieve. This mastery over the interior climate was a breathtaking display of technological prowess, one that transformed these sealed chambers from simple stone boxes into highly sophisticated life support systems for power. The absence of windows was not a limitation to be overcome. It was the foundational feature that made this precise environmental control possible. In the sprawling desert palaces of ancient Persia, architects engineered a revolutionary system known as the Badger or Windcatcher. These towering, chimney-like structures rose high above the roofline, designed to catch the slightest breeze and funnel it down into the heart of the palace. But the true genius lay underground. The captured air was channeled down into qanats, subterranean canals that ran beneath the palace floors. As the air traveled through these cool, damp tunnels, it would drop in temperature significantly before being gently released into the sealed royal apartments and council chambers below. The result was a form of ancient air conditioning, delivering a continuous stream of refreshingly cool air into rooms that otherwise would have been stifling ovens. This wasn't just about luxury, it was a potent demonstration of the king's power. While his subjects sweltered in the oppressive heat, he conducted the affairs of state in a perfectly climate-controlled environment. A man so powerful he could command the very wind itself to bring him comfort. Meanwhile, along the Nile, Egyptian engineers were solving a different environmental puzzle: preservation for eternity. Within the windowless, deeply buried burial chambers of the pharaohs, maintaining a constant, stable atmosphere was critical to preventing the decay of the mummy and the priceless grave goods intended for the afterlife. The massive stone blocks of the pyramids and rock-cut tombs acted as a phenomenal thermal mass, insulating the inner sanctum from the extreme temperature fluctuations of the desert outside. Humidity was the enemy, and the Egyptians brilliantly managed it through the use of hygroscopic materials. Bags of natron salt, the same substance used in the mummification process, were often placed strategically within the tomb to absorb excess moisture from the air. The complete lack of ventilation ensured that once the ideal dry, stable conditions were achieved after the tomb was sealed, they would remain virtually unchanged for millennia. This incredible foresight preserved not just the physical body of the king, but also organic materials like wood, leather, and textiles that would have otherwise turned to dust, allowing Tutankhamun's treasures to astonish the world over 3,000 years later. Their ability to design a time capsule of such perfection speaks to an advanced understanding of materials science and environmental physics that we are only now fully appreciating. The control extended brilliantly to the very element that defines how we see light. In a world without windows, illumination became a powerful dramatic tool, meticulously crafted and deployed. The ruler alone decided what was illuminated and what remained shrouded in mystery. In the great hall of a Mycenaean megaron, the only light might come from a central hearth fire, casting a flickering, dynamic glow that animated the faces of the elite warriors gathered in council, while leaving the vast corners of the room in deep, impenetrable shadow. This created pockets of intimacy and emphasis within a large space. In the labyrinthine Minoan palaces, strategically placed light wells and clerestory openings high on the walls would funnel narrow beams of sunlight onto specific areas, perhaps a central pillar shrine or a beautifully painted fresco at precise times of day, turning architecture into a sacred timepiece and spotlight. The most common solution, however, was the controlled use of oil lamps. These were not simply scattered randomly. In places like the Roman Mithraeums, underground temples to the god Mithras, niches were carved into the walls to hold lamps, directing their light to illuminate specific cult statues or ritual scenes while keeping the initiates who gathered there in relative darkness. This choreography of light and shadow was a form of visual storytelling, guiding the viewer's eye and controlling their emotional response. A king could sit in a pool of light, his jewels glittering, while petitioners approached from the darkness, immediately establishing a power dynamic before a single word was spoken. By conquering the interior environment, commanding the wind, defying decay, and sculpting with light, these ancient rulers presented themselves not as mere men, but as masters of the natural order. Their sealed chambers were the ultimate proof of this dominion, showcasing a technological sophistication that reinforced their claim to a God-given right to rule. Beyond their symbolic and psychological power, these sealed chambers served an intensely practical and often overlooked purpose. They were formidable strongholds designed to protect their contents from every conceivable threat, both human and natural. Imagine the constant anxieties of an ancient ruler, the fear of invasion, the threat of internal coup, the vulnerability of priceless treasures to theft, and the relentless decay caused by time and the elements. The windowless, inaccessible room was the ultimate answer to all these fears, a multi-layered defense system built into the very architecture of power. In the stark, imposing keeps of medieval castles, the innermost rooms were often designed as final redoubts, with walls several meters thick and no external openings whatsoever. During a prolonged siege, when the outer walls had been breached and the courtyard was overrun, the defending lord and his family could retreat to this windowless core. Here they were protected from incoming arrows, catapulted stones, and the attempts of invaders to smoke them out. The sheer, unbroken stone faces offered no purchase for siege ladders and no weak point to batter down. It was a physical fortress within a fortress, a last bastion of safety that could hold out long enough for a relief army to arrive or for the attackers to give up in frustration. This principle of deep protection was understood millennia earlier by the Bronze Age kings of Mycenae. Their palace complexes, like the famous citadel of Turin, were labyrinths of corridors and chambers. The heart of this labyrinth, the treasury and the royal apartments, were not located for convenience but for security. Access was through a series of baffling passageways, sharp turns, and multiple guarded gates known as propylons. This convoluted approach, known as a dogleg entrance, was a brilliant defensive feature. It prevented any invading force from gaining a direct line of sight or a straight charging path into the palace's core. An attacker would have to navigate a narrow, twisting corridor, exposed to defensive fire from above and from the sides at every turn, all while never quite knowing what lay around the next corner. The final room itself, containing the kingdom's gold, ceremonial weapons, and vital records, would be a small, windowless vault, perhaps buried even deeper within the complex. Its location alone was a secret, and its impenetrable design guaranteed that even if the outer palace fell, its greatest wealth might remain hidden and secure, to be recovered by the rightful ruler later. This wasn't just about protecting gold. It was about protecting the very means of power, the resources needed to raise an army, reward loyalty, and restore a dynasty. The protective function extended beyond repelling human enemies to safeguarding against the slow, silent attack of the environment. In the dry, sandy deserts of Egypt, the relentless sun and the abrasive wind were constant forces of erosion and decay. A window was a vulnerability, an opening through which desert winds could carry fine, grinding dust to slowly abrade paintings, corrode metal, and deteriorate delicate papyrus scrolls. The completely sealed environment of a tomb or a treasury chamber created a stable microclimate, shielding its contents from these destructive elements. The constant temperature and humidity levels inside a windowless stone room, insulated by tons of earth and rock, acted as a natural preservation system, ensuring that wooden artifacts did not crack, textiles did not rot, and paintings remained vibrant for centuries. This environmental defense was a critical investment in legacy, ensuring that the wealth and sacred objects intended for the gods or the afterlife would survive intact exactly as they were placed. Perhaps the most subtle yet potent form of protection offered by these sealed spaces was psychological. By completely concealing sensitive activities, whether it was the counting of tribute, the planning of military campaigns, or the deliberation of justice, a ruler created a powerful shield against dissent and conspiracy. Uncertainty is a weak foundation for a rebellion. If a potential rival cannot see who is meeting with the king, what is being discussed, or where the state's wealth is actually stored, their ability to plot a successful coup is severely limited. The sealed chamber became a black box at the heart of power, generating an aura of omniscience and inevitability. Subjects might grumble, but they could never be sure of the king's strength, his alliances, or his resources. This pervasive uncertainty was a powerful deterrent, making the sealed room not just a vault for objects, but a fortress for the mystique of authority itself, proving that the strongest walls are often those built in the mind. This profound connection between the sealed chamber and the cosmos transforms architecture from a mere building into a living, breathing model of the universe itself. The ruler, positioned at the absolute center of this microcosm, was no longer just a political leader. He became the literal axis mundi, the pivotal point around which the entire celestial order revolved. His every action was synchronized with the movements of the heavens, and his sealed sanctum was the control room for this cosmic partnership. We see this principle executed with breathtaking precision in the great funerary temples of Egypt's new kingdom pharaohs. The entire temple complex was not just oriented toward the Nile. Its long processional avenue and the series of increasingly sacred courtyards and halls were meticulously aligned on an east-west axis, mirroring the daily journey of the sun god Ra. The innermost sanctuary, the windowless Holy of Holies, was positioned so that on the morning of the equinox, a single shaft of sunlight would pierce the overwhelming darkness of the temple's interior, traveling down the entire length of the corridor to illuminate the cult statue of the god for a few precious moments. This wasn't a random event, it was a carefully engineered miracle. For the priests, this beam of light was the divine energy of Ra physically entering the temple and reanimating the god's statue, a renewal of the cosmic covenant that sustained Egypt. The pharaoh, as the son of Ra, was the indispensable intermediary in this process. The architecture physically demonstrated that his power was not just sanctioned by the gods, it was woven into the very fabric of time and space. This celestial choreography reached an even more sophisticated level in the Americas. The Pyramid of Kukulkan at Chichen Itza is perhaps the most famous example of this cosmic alignment in stone. While the pyramid itself is not solid, its most sacred inner chambers were deeply enclosed and accessible only to the elite. The entire structure, however, functions as a giant astronomical clock. During the spring and autumn equinoxes, the setting sun casts a series of triangular shadows along the northern staircase, creating the illusion of a massive serpent slithering down from the heavens to earth. This light show would have culminated at the base of the pyramid, at the entrance to a sacred space, powerfully linking the ruler inside with the feathered serpent god Kukulkan. The message was unequivocal. The king's authority was not just political, it was a direct manifestation of a divine, celestial force arriving on a schedule as predictable as the seasons. Similarly, at the Temple of the Sun at Machu Picchu, a single window in an otherwise sealed ceremonial chamber is perfectly aligned to catch the first rays of the sun during the winter solstice, illuminating a ritual stone at the heart of the room. This annual event marked a critical turning point in the agricultural calendar, a moment of rebirth and renewed light. The Inca emperor, the Sapa Inca, would have been the central figure in the rituals conducted in this precisely illuminated space. By controlling this moment of celestial contact, he demonstrated his role as the guarantor of the harvest and the mediator who ensured the sun's return. The sealed room concentrated this cosmic event, making it a private, powerful transaction between the ruler and the sun god in Tai. This architectural fusion of earth and sky served a dual purpose. On one hand, it was the ultimate validation of the ruler's power, providing an irrefutable, astronomical justification for their reign that was literally set in stone. The pyramids and temples became permanent, unchanging proof of their divine connection. On the other hand, these structures functioned as incredibly accurate calendars, essential for organizing agriculture, religious festivals, and trade in complex societies. The windowless inner chamber was the calm, stable, and sacred heart of this vast timekeeping machine. By enclosing it, ancient cultures did more than just protect it. They created a vessel to contain the immense power they believed was channeled during these celestial alignments. They were capturing a sliver of the sun's power on the solstice, harnessing the energy of a specific star, or trapping the moment of equinoctial balance within their walls. This controlled environment prevented this potent cosmic energy from dissipating, allowing it to be carefully managed and utilized by the ruler for the benefit of the kingdom. The line between the palace and the universe didn't just blur, it disappeared entirely, with the king's throne room becoming the center of a carefully ordered cosmos. Within these silent, sealed chambers, the walls themselves spoke a secret language of power, a visual symphony of ideology and myth meant for an audience of gods and kings alone. Far from being blank stone, these inaccessible spaces were often saturated with the most elaborate and sophisticated art of their time, vibrant frescoes, intricate carvings, and sacred inscriptions that turned the architecture into a canvas for propaganda, a guide for the soul, and a manifesto of divine right. This art served a purpose entirely different from the public monuments that adorned temple exteriors or city squares. Those were for mass consumption, designed to inspire awe in the populace. The art of the sealed chamber was a private, potent dialogue, a concentrated dose of belief and authority meant to be absorbed by the very few who were permitted to enter, or in some cases, by no living person at all. Consider the mysterious Minoans of Crete. In the palace of Knossos, beyond the bustling central courts, lay sunken lustral basins and small, enclosed rooms adorned with breathtaking frescoes. One of the most famous, the Priest King, or Prince of the Lilies fresco, depicts a youthful, powerful figure wearing an elaborate plumed crown, moving with an athletic grace through a field of flowers. This wasn't just decoration. For the handful of initiates who saw it in the flickering torchlight of that secluded space, the image was a direct reinforcement of a sacred narrative. It visually articulated the ideal of the ruler as a semi-divine figure, intimately connected to nature and possessing the vitality and authority to lead. The confined nature of the room meant the viewer was completely surrounded by this ideology, immersed in a world where the boundary between the human king and a nature god was beautifully, intentionally blurred. This use of art as a private, functional tool reaches its absolute zenith in the tomb art of ancient Egypt. The walls of a pharaoh's burial chamber, hidden deep within a pyramid or carved into a bedrock valley, were never meant to be seen by human eyes after the funeral ceremony. Their sole audience was the deceased pharaoh and the gods he would meet in the afterlife. The entire chamber was transformed into a detailed guidebook and a collection of magical spells. Vivid paintings and hieroglyphs depicted every step of the journey through the Jewat, the Egyptian underworld, the weighing of the heart against the feather of Mat, the friendly and hostile deities to be encountered, the incantations to be spoken to open doors and overcome obstacles. Scenes of abundant harvests and happy daily life on the walls ensured these things would be magically provided for eternity. This art was not for admiration, it was for activation. Its power was believed to be literal and effective only if it remained pristine, unobserved, and protected from the corrupting influence of the living world. The windowless, sealed nature of the tomb was the ultimate guarantee of this preservation, ensuring the painting's colors stayed vibrant and their magical potency remained undiminished for millennia, faithfully waiting to serve their royal master. The strategic absence of windows played a crucial dual role in this process. Firstly, it was the greatest art conservation project in history. By eliminating ultraviolet light, temperature fluctuations, and humidity from the outside world, these ancient curators protected their pigments from fading and their plaster from cracking. This is why the colors in Tutankhamun's tomb stunned the world when it was opened. They had been perfectly preserved in a dark, climate-controlled time capsule for over 3,000 years. Secondly, and just as importantly, the lack of windows guaranteed the secrecy of the message. The intricate knowledge, the sacred symbols, and the specific rituals depicted were meant for the elite alone. Allowing that art to be visible would be like publishing a state's most classified intelligence documents for all to see. It would demystify the source of the ruler's power and make the exclusive knowledge of the priesthood common property. By locking this art away, the ruling class maintained a monopoly on the spiritual and practical knowledge that justified their authority, using visual culture not just to support their power, but to actively construct and perpetuate it within a sacred, silent, and secret space. Yet the true mastery of this artificial illumination lay not in simple visibility, but in its meticulous choreography. In the windowless chambers of ancient rulers, light was not a utility. It was a prop in a carefully directed performance of power. The complete absence of natural light gave the controller of the lamps an almost godlike ability to shape reality itself. They could dictate not only what was seen, but crucially when it was seen and for how long. A Roman emperor seeking to intimidate a foreign ambassador might have that dignitary wait in near total darkness within a vast audience hall. The only sound might be the distant drip of water and the scuttling of rats in the unseen corners of the room. Then, with a sudden, silent cue, a series of oil lamps would be uncovered in a prearranged sequence, their light reflecting off polished bronze shields held by hidden attendants. The beams would converge on the emperor's throne, illuminating him as if he had just materialized from the ether, already seated in judgment. This theatrical reveal was designed to bypass rational thought and strike directly at the visitor's primal instincts, creating a moment of shock and awe that made the emperor appear less a man and more a supernatural apparition. This manipulation of light and shadow found one of its most sophisticated expressions in the underground temples of the Roman god Mithras, known as Mithraeums. These were long, narrow, and barrel-vaulted chambers, deliberately designed to resemble caves and completely sealed from the outside world. The only light came from a series of small oil lamps placed in niches along the walls. The flickering, uneven light from these flames would dance across the elaborate cult relief at the far end of the temple, which depicted Mithras in the act of slaying the cosmic bull. The moving shadows made the scene appear dynamic, as if the sacred drama was unfolding in real time before the initiates. The play of light would highlight certain elements, the knife, the bull's wound, the scorpion at its feet, while leaving other parts of the narrative in suggestive darkness. This wasn't just illumination, it was a form of visual storytelling that guided the viewer's focus and intensified the mystical, emotional impact of the ritual. The controlled, dramatic atmosphere made the teachings of the cult feel more vivid, immediate, and real than they ever could in the plain light of day. The technology behind this ancient stagecraft was often ingenious. The Egyptians, for instance, were masters of using reflective surfaces to direct light precisely where they wanted it. In some tombs and temples, strategically placed sheets of polished copper or bronze would catch the light from a single central lamp and bounce it onto a specific hieroglyph or a statue's face, creating a spotlight effect millennia before the invention of the electric bulb. Similarly, in the great palaces of Mesopotamia, servants might use large, fan-shaped objects made of beaten gold or silver to catch and redirect the light from a central fire, subtly highlighting the ruler during an important announcement. This command over illumination served a profound psychological purpose. In a world of utter darkness, the human eye is instinctively drawn to the brightest point. By making themselves or a sacred object the sole source of significant light, rulers and priests naturally became the absolute center of attention. They commanded not just the gaze but the very focus of their subjects' consciousness. The surrounding darkness, meanwhile, became a canvas for fear and imagination. What lurked in those unseen corners? What secrets did the shadows hold? This deliberate use of contrast between the known and the unknown, the seen and the unseen, was a powerful tool for maintaining an aura of mystery and control, proving that in the theater of power, what you choose to hide is often as important as what you choose to reveal. Think about stepping from a bright, noisy courtyard into a room of absolute silence and perfect darkness. Your eyes strain to see but find nothing. Your ears, accustomed to the distant sounds of the city, hear only the thrum of your own pulse. This sudden, jarring shift was not a design flaw, it was the entire point. Ancient architects understood something profound about human perception. By stripping away the familiar, they could heighten the senses that remained, engineering an experience that felt less like a ceremony and more like a journey into another world. In the complete sensory vacuum of a sealed chamber, the slightest stimulus became monumental. The brush of a priest's robe against stone, the scent of rare incense curling through the air, the sound of a single drop of water falling into a basin, each became a focal point of intense awareness, pulling the participant deeper into a state of altered consciousness. This was psychological alchemy, turning the raw materials of stone and space into an engine of transcendence. We find one of the most powerful examples of this in the Greek mystery cults, particularly the rites performed at Eleusis in honor of the goddess Demeter. For over 1,000 years, initiates from across the ancient world, from humble farmers to philosophers and emperors, underwent a secret ceremony that promised a revelation about life and death. The climax of this multi-day initiation is believed to have taken place in a special hall called the Telesterion, a large, windowless structure designed to hold thousands of people in utter darkness. After a long procession and periods of fasting, the initiates would be led into this blackened hall. The doors were sealed. In that overwhelming void, their other senses were unleashed. They might hear the sudden clash of cymbals, a dramatic chord from an olo's flute, or a priest's voice chanting from an unseen corner. They would smell the potent, earthy scent of kykeon, a sacred barley brew mingling with the smoke of torches. They might feel the touch of a sacred object pass through their hands or the chill of the stone floor beneath their feet. In this hyper-suggestible state, a powerful vision was likely induced, perhaps through a cleverly staged ritual drama using light and sound effects from a central raised platform. The emotional impact was legendary. Ancient sources describe initiates emerging forever changed, freed from the fear of death, having seen the ultimate truth. This profound experience was made possible by the architecture itself. The windowless, sealed telesterion created the perfect sensory deprivation tank, allowing the cult's leaders to control every aspect of the environment and guide the initiates toward a powerful, personal revelation that cemented their faith and loyalty. This principle of using sensory manipulation to induce awe wasn't limited to Greece. In the subterranean Mithraic temples across the Roman Empire, initiates would partake in a ritual meal in a cramped, cave-like space that mimicked the cosmos. The air would be thick with the smell of roasted meat and wine, and the only light came from flickering torches that made the carved images of Mithras slaying the bull seem to move on the walls. The combination of confined space, rhythmic chanting, and a controlled diet could easily lead to an altered state of consciousness, making the symbolic journey of the soul feel terrifyingly real. Similarly, in the deep, painted chambers of Egyptian tombs, a priest performing the opening of the mouth ritual for a mummy would have been working in near total darkness, broken only by the light of a single lamp. The ritual's success depended on precise touches with ceremonial tools, and adds to the mouth a pesesh kef knife to the lips. In that silent, focused environment, every gesture, every whispered incantation was amplified in significance. The slightest sound echoed, making the priest's words seem to be answered by the gods themselves. This intense sensory focus transformed a symbolic procedure into a genuine, felt connection with the divine. By mastering this sensory environment, ancient religious and political leaders weren't just creating a mood, they were actively manipulating human neurology. They understood that consciousness is fragile and malleable, deeply influenced by its surroundings. A person whose senses are deprived of their usual anchors becomes more open, more impressionable, and more vulnerable to suggestion. This made them perfectly primed to accept the authority of the person guiding the experience. The leader, who seemed to know the secrets of navigating this disorienting realm, appeared not just as a priest or a king, but as a true psychopomp, a guide of souls who could lead them through the darkness and into the light of revelation. This psychological crafting reveals a sophisticated, almost modern understanding of how to use architecture not just to impress, but to fundamentally alter human experience and belief, proving that the most powerful walls are those that shape the mind from the inside out. This architectural enforcement of social order was perhaps most brutally literal in the sprawling palaces of the Assyrian Empire, where the very blueprint of the building was a map of power and exclusion. A common petitioner or foreign envoy would first enter a vast, open courtyard teeming with soldiers, scribes, and servants, a space designed to impress with its scale and controlled chaos. From there, they might be led through a series of increasingly restrictive gateways, each guarded and each marking a step closer to the center. But the final transition was the most telling. The move from a columned portico into the Bit Hilani, the king's exclusive reception hall. This room was often intentionally windowless, a stark, oppressive box illuminated only by the light from the doorway and the flicker of oil lamps. The psychological effect of crossing that threshold was immense. You left the open air, the sounds of the city, and the sight of the sky behind you, entering a man-made world where the king controlled every single element of your reality. The air was still and heavy with incense. The walls were covered in terrifying reliefs of the king hunting lions or leading conquered enemies into slavery. In this claustrophobic environment, the social hierarchy wasn't just suggested, it was physically imposed. You were literally in his world now, and every breath you took was a reminder of your subordinate status. The architecture made it terrifyingly clear that power resided here, in this sealed chamber, and it was not a commodity to be shared or questioned. This wasn't merely about keeping the lower classes out. It was about actively constructing and performing elite identity for those allowed in. For the noblemen and high officials who were permitted to gather in these exclusive halls, the experience was a powerful reinforcement of their own privileged position within the system. They were the insiders, the ones who understood the secrets, who could navigate the labyrinthine corridors of the palace and, by extension, the state. Their access to these sealed spaces was a continuous physical validation of their loyalty and their birthright. It created a powerful sense of group cohesion among the elite, binding them together through shared experience and shared exclusion of everyone else. The very difficulty of access made their membership feel more valuable. This architectural strategy effectively turned the ruling class into a sealed unit itself, a social chamber with no windows to the outside world of common experience, perpetuating its own insular values and ensuring that power remained concentrated within a tightly controlled group. The design of the palace, therefore, didn't just reflect the social structure. It actively worked to cement it generation after generation by making abstract concepts like loyalty, privilege, and hierarchy into something you could literally walk through and feel in the oppressive air around you. But beyond the psychological awe and the cosmic alignments, the sealed chamber served a purpose that was brutally practical and foundational to all power. It was the ultimate vault. At its core, a kingdom's might was measured not just in spiritual authority, but in cold, hard resources: gold, grain, weapons, and the clay tablets that recorded who owned what and who owed whom. These were the arteries of the state, and a ruler's most sacred duty was to protect them. A windowless, inaccessible room was the most sophisticated security system the ancient world could devise. A fortress designed to defend against two relentless enemies: human greed and the slow, silent decay of time. In the vast administrative heart of the Persian Empire, at sites like Persepolis, the protection of economic assets was a science. Treasury rooms, often located in the most defensible part of the complex, were marvels of Chinese letter design. Their walls were thick, windowless stone, and their single entrance might have been blocked by a massive, bronze-reinforced door secured with an elaborate locking mechanism known only to a trusted few. Inside, on row upon row of shelves, sat the empire's wealth: meticulously weighed gold and silver derricks in leather bags, precious tribute from conquered lands, ivory from Ethiopia, lapis lazuli from Afghanistan, carved cedar wood from Phoenicia, and perhaps most importantly, the endless stacks of clay tablets that formed the imperial accounting records. These tablets were the database of the empire, detailing tax revenues, military payrolls, and inventory of state-owned granaries. Their loss to theft or damage would cause administrative chaos, crippling the machinery of government. The sealed, stable environment of the treasury protected these vital records from the elements that would destroy them: sun that could bake clay to dust, rain that could melt inscribed cuneiform into mud, and wind that could scatter priceless papyrus scrolls to the four corners of the earth. This control over access was in itself a powerful form of economic theater. A ruler was not just a hoarder of wealth, he was its supreme distributor. By deciding when the doors to the treasury were opened, he controlled the entire rhythm of economic life. The distribution of seed grain at the start of the planting season, the payment of soldiers mustering for a campaign, the dispersal of food stores during a famine. These were all public spectacles of patronage that originated from the sealed sanctum. A subject receiving a measure of grain from the king's own stores wasn't just getting food. They were receiving a tangible symbol of the ruler's role as the provider and sustainer of life itself. This created a relationship of absolute dependence. The people's survival was literally locked away inside the palace, and only the king, through his designated priests or administrators, held the key. This economic manipulation transformed abstract power into a daily reality for every citizen, from the highest noble to the lowest farmer. Their well-being was explicitly tied to the ruler's controlled generosity, making loyalty a matter of practical necessity, not just abstract fealty. The architecture of the sealed room made this system physically manifest, turning the entire economy into an extension of the royal will, its flow meticulously regulated by the stone walls that protected its source. But how did they actually build these impossible spaces? Constructing a massive, stable room without a single window or conventional door was one of the ancient world's most audacious engineering challenges. It demanded a breathtaking fusion of brute strength and brilliant innovation, turning architects into magicians of stone and space. Forget the simple idea of four walls and a roof. These structures were complex puzzles where stability, air, and light all had to be solved without the simple solution of an opening. The Egyptians, masters of monumental architecture, faced the ultimate test with the burial chambers deep within their pyramids. The weight of millions of stone blocks pressing down from above was unimaginable. To prevent the king's eternal home from collapsing into a pile of rubble, they developed the corbelled vault. This wasn't a true arch, but a clever stepping of stone layers inward with each course, gradually narrowing the ceiling until it could be capped with a single slab. This technique effectively distributed the immense gravitational forces down through the walls, creating a stable, cavern-like space that has endured for millennia. But a stone box buried under a mountain of rock becomes a tomb in more ways than one without fresh air. The solution was as ingenious as it was hidden, carefully engineered ventilation shafts. In the Great Pyramid, narrow, long channels were drilled from the inner chambers all the way to the outer surface. These weren't for light or for the king's soul to travel through, as is sometimes romantically suggested. They were functional air ducts. They created a subtle convection current, allowing the stifling, stagnant air deep within the pyramid to be slowly exchanged, ensuring the workers could breathe during construction and preserving the environment within long after it was sealed. This wasn't just building, it was a profound understanding of physics hidden behind tons of solid limestone. The Romans, ever the practical engineers, took this knowledge and ran with it, pushing the possibilities of enclosed spaces to new heights literally, with their revolutionary use of concrete and the true arch. While the Egyptians were masters of stacking, the Romans mastered shaping. Their development of hydraulic concrete, a material that could even set underwater, allowed them to create vast, windowless interior volumes that were simply unthinkable before. Think of the magnificent Pantheon in Rome, with its soaring, uninterrupted dome, the largest in the world for over 1,000 years. At its apex is a single, large oculus, an eye to the sky, but the rest of the structure is a perfect, seamless sphere of space with no other openings. This was the ultimate expression of Roman engineering confidence. The dome is not solid stone but a masterpiece of lightweight aggregate and progressively thinner layers, with hidden internal arches channeling the weight down to 8 massive piers. They could build breathtakingly large, enclosed spaces that felt open and airy, all while maintaining structural integrity and security. This technical prowess was a powerful part of the imperial message. A visiting chieftain from a land of wood and thatch would be led into such a space and would have no frame of reference for how it was even possible. The ability to command such a project, to quarry the materials, transport them, feed the army of skilled laborers, and execute such a precise design was the ultimate flex. It demonstrated control over men, resources, and the very laws of nature. The building itself was a monument to the ruler's unparalleled organizational power, proving he could achieve the seemingly impossible and create a world entirely of his own making, sealed off from the old one. This remarkable architectural principle of the sealed chamber wasn't a monolithic concept but a brilliant idea that was adapted, reinterpreted, and reinvented by cultures across the globe, each imprinting it with their own unique worldview and values. The core function, creating a controlled, inaccessible space of immense importance, remained constant, but the reasons and the symbolism shifted dramatically from one civilization to the next, painting a rich tapestry of human belief and ingenuity. Consider the profound spiritual logic of the Hindu temple in India. At its absolute heart lies the Garbhagriha, which translates literally to womb chamber. This is a small, square, and almost always completely dark and windowless room where the statue of the deity, or the Murti, resides. Unlike the Egyptian sanctuary that shielded divine power from dilution, the Garbhagriha's darkness is symbolic of the unmanifest, formless cosmos before creation. It is a space of potentiality, of pure, concentrated divine energy. The deity is not being protected from the outside world. Rather, the outside world is being generated from this sacred center. The darkness isn't an absence of light but a positive presence, the fertile void from which all existence springs. A devotee never enters this womb chamber. They stand at its threshold, the only opening to receive darshan, a reciprocal sighting of the divine. The priest alone enters to perform rituals, acting as a midwife to this cosmic energy. Here, seclusion isn't about secrecy or defense, but about representing the most fundamental, creative mystery of the universe itself. Now travel to the cold, windswept shores of a Norse fjord, and you'll find the same architectural principle put to a vastly different, more pragmatic use. The Great Mead Hall was the center of a chieftain's power, a longhouse filled with the sounds of feasting, storytelling, and camaraderie. But leading off from this public space might be a smaller, enclosed room, often built with thicker walls and no windows. This was the stofa, or the chief's private chamber. This wasn't a sacred space in the religious sense. It was a war room. Here, the chief and his most trusted housecarls would plan raids, discuss alliances, and debate strategy, shielded from the ears of the common warriors drinking in the main hall. In a culture rife with rivalries and where information was a currency of life and death, this physical barrier was essential for survival. The secrecy here was intensely practical. A leaked plan could mean ambush at sea, the loss of ships and men, and the utter downfall of a clan. The windowless room ensured that strategies remained confidential and that the chief could control the narrative, revealing his plans only when the longships were already in the water. This space embodied a raw temporal power, where seclusion was a tool for military advantage and political consolidation, a world away from the spiritual womb of the Indian temple. Even within single cultural traditions, we see fascinating nuances. In Japan, the dozo, traditional earthen storehouses, were built with incredibly thick, windowless walls made of clay and straw for both insulation and security. They protected a family's most precious heirlooms, kimonos, and scrolls from fire and theft, representing a different kind of power, economic stability, and familial lineage. Contrast this with the indigenous kivas of the American Pueblo peoples, which are round, partially subterranean, and enclosed ceremonial rooms, entered through a single hole in the roof by ladder. The kiva represents a journey back into the earth, the place of emergence. Its seclusion creates a sacred, communal space for rituals that connect the people to their ancestors and the spirit world, separate from the daily life in the rooms above. This incredible global diversity reveals a profound truth. The windowless room is our architectural archetype, a fundamental tool in the human toolkit for dealing with power. Whether that power is spiritual, military, economic, or social, the act of enclosing it, of setting it apart, is a universal impulse, What changes is the story we tell about it. The Indian temple tells a story of cosmic creation, the Norse hall a story of survival and conquest, the Japanese storehouse a story of preservation, and the Pueblo Kiva a story of community and origin. By comparing these variations, we see not a single, simple explanation, but a spectrum of human ingenuity. It shows us that different cultures, faced with the same basic challenge of how to handle that which is most valuable and potent, arrived at the same brilliant architectural solution, but infused it with their own unique meaning and purpose. This rich tapestry of interpretation naturally makes us question the simplistic assumptions we might bring to these ancient spaces. Yet for all their mystery, these sealed chambers are often shrouded in modern misconceptions that can obscure their true purpose. It's easy to fall into the trap of imagining them as universally dark, secret dungeons, but the reality is far more nuanced and fascinating. Take the idea of secrecy, for instance. While the activities inside were highly guarded, the existence of these rooms was often widely known to the public. The average citizen of ancient Egypt was well aware of the Holy of Holies deep within the temple complex. They simply understood it was a place they could never enter. This wasn't a secret hidden away, but a very public demonstration of exclusivity. The power came not from concealment but from the visible, imposing barrier between the sacred and the profane, a constant reminder of the social and spiritual hierarchy that structured their entire world. Another common myth paints these spaces as uniformly pitch black and oppressive. While many were indeed dark to enhance ritual atmosphere, others employed brilliant techniques to manipulate light. The burial chamber of Pharaoh Seti I in the Valley of the Kings is a stunning counterexample. Its walls and ceiling are covered in thousands of square feet of intricate, raised relief carvings depicting his journey to the afterlife. To appreciate this artistry, the ancient artisans needed light. Scholars believe they used highly polished sheets of bronze or gold to reflect sunlight from the entrance down a series of corridors, effectively creating an ancient system of mirrors to illuminate their work. In Minoan palaces, light wells and clerestory windows high on the walls would funnel daylight deep into the complex, strategically highlighting altars or vibrant frescoes. The goal wasn't always darkness, it was absolute control over illumination, using it as a dramatic tool to guide focus and emotion. Perhaps the most significant misconception is that these windowless rooms were instruments of pure oppression, tools for a tyrannical elite to hoard power. While control was certainly a factor, many of these spaces served a profoundly communal purpose, strengthening group identity rather than just enforcing top-down rule. Consider the kivas of the ancestral Pueblo peoples in the American Southwest. These round, partially subterranean, and enclosed chambers were entered by descending a ladder through a single opening in the roof. Inside, the community would gather for ceremonies that reinforced their shared myths, histories, and social bonds. The seclusion of the kiva created a sacred container separate from daily life, a place where the entire group could participate in rituals that ensured cosmic balance and communal well-being. Similarly, the initiation rites of Greek mystery cults in enclosed halls like the Telesterion at Eleusis were transformative experiences that promised personal revelation and a release from the fear of death for thousands of initiates. This was not oppression but a deeply valued service that fostered incredible loyalty and a powerful shared identity among its members. By separating fact from romantic fiction, we see these architectural marvels not as simplistic symbols of domination but as sophisticated, multifaceted tools that could manage power, foster community, and connect humanity to the divine in a breathtakingly complex tapestry of ancient life. The echoes of these ancient sealed chambers resonate powerfully in the steel and glass canyons of our modern world, proving that the fundamental human needs for security, control, and preservation have changed remarkably little over millennia. We may have swapped stone blocks for reinforced concrete and torches for fiber optic light, but the underlying architectural principles remain strikingly familiar. Walk into the corporate headquarters of any major tech giant or financial institution, and you will find a direct descendant of the Mycenaean treasury, the secure server room. These are the modern holy of holies, housing not golden idols but the lifeblood of the 21st century, data. Accessed through a series of security checkpoints requiring keycards, biometric scans, and PIN codes, these windowless, climate-controlled spaces are protected from electromagnetic pulses, cyber intrusions, and physical threats. They are the treasuries of our time, safeguarding intellectual property and financial assets with the same paranoid intensity that an ancient king protected his gold, because data is now the ultimate source of power and wealth. This legacy extends beyond the corporate world into our cultural sanctuaries. Step into a major museum like the Louvre or the Metropolitan Museum of Art, and you will enter galleries that are masterclasses in ancient environmental control. To protect priceless Renaissance paintings or delicate centuries-old textiles from irreversible damage, these rooms are often completely sealed off from natural light. Ultraviolet filtered artificial lighting is meticulously calibrated, and the climate is maintained at a constant, precise temperature and humidity level by vast, hidden HVAC systems. This is the direct evolution of the Egyptian tomb builder's craft, creating a perfect, stable microclimate to preserve irreplaceable artifacts for future generations. The goal is identical: to halt the decay of time itself. Even in the most personal of spaces, the modern home, we see this ancient instinct emerge. The proliferation of panic rooms or safe rooms, reinforced windowless chambers hidden behind bookshelves or disguised as closets, equipped with independent communication and air supply, is a poignant echo of the medieval lord retreating to the keep. It represents the most primal application of this architectural principle: the creation of an impenetrable, controlled space to protect what we value most from an unpredictable and dangerous world. This enduring continuity reveals a profound truth about human nature and design. The specific threats have evolved from invading armies to home intruders, from sun damage to server farms overheating, but our core response remains the same. We still build containers for power, whether that power is measured in terabytes, dollars, or simply the safety of our families. The modern world has not outgrown the need for seclusion and control. It has simply found new languages to express it. This deep-seated architectural impulse, refined over thousands of years, demonstrates that the most innovative solutions are often those that address our most timeless fears and desires. By recognizing this unbroken thread connecting the pharaoh's tomb to the bank vault, we gain a deeper appreciation for the ingenuity of our ancestors, whose solutions were so fundamentally sound that they continue to shape the spaces we build today. For centuries, these windowless chambers existed only in the fragmentary accounts of historians and the faded lines of ancient scrolls, their true nature left to speculation and legend. It is the meticulous, patient work of archaeology that has finally allowed these silent stone sentinels to speak, transforming theory into tangible truth. Each excavation that breaches a long sealed doorway doesn't just reveal a room. It opens a direct window into the mindset of the people who built it, offering clues not in words, but in the very objects they chose to leave behind in perfect isolation. At the Hittite capital of Hattusa in modern-day Turkey, archaeologists uncovered the vast palace archives, a series of small, windowless storage rooms that held not weapons or gold, but tens of thousands of baked clay tablets. These tablets, inscribed with the intricate cuneiform script of the Hittite Empire, were the meticulously filed records of state, treaties, legal codes, correspondence, and detailed accounts of religious rituals. Their placement in these secure, climate-controlled rooms was a deliberate act of preservation, safeguarding the intellectual and administrative foundation of the entire empire. The very act of storing this knowledge in a sealed space elevated it to the same status as a sacred relic or a royal treasure, proving that for the Hittites, information was the ultimate source of power, too precious to be exposed to the open air. Half a world away, on the arid northern coast of Peru, the Chimu culture expressed a similar reverence for the sacred through enclosure, but with a far more spiritual and chilling purpose. At the site of Chan Chan, a vast adobe city, archaeologists have uncovered audientias U-shaped, windowless ceremonial structures often decorated with elaborate friezes of mythical sea creatures. Within these secluded spaces, they made a grim and powerful discovery: the remains of ritual offerings, including finely crafted ceramics, textiles, and, most significantly, the skeletons of young women. These individuals were not interred in a traditional tomb. They were entombed within the architecture itself as part of a foundation or closure ritual, a practice known as kapakacha. The sealed room here was not a treasury for objects but a permanent container for a profound sacrificial act, meant to consecrate the space and bind spiritual power to the ruler's authority for all eternity. The intact nature of these finds, protected from looters and the elements by their hidden, inaccessible design, provides irrefutable, heart-wrenching evidence of the extreme lengths ancient rulers would go to legitimize their power and connect with the divine. Perhaps the most thrilling aspect of archaeological discovery is its capacity to completely overturn our assumptions. For decades, the mysterious, windowless, circular stone structures found on Minoan Crete were classified as tombs or grave circles based on their solemn, sealed appearance. Yet, when carefully excavated, many were found to be utterly empty of human remains. Instead, they contained a very different assemblage of artifacts: large, ceremonial stone vessels called ritual haita, fragments of ornate drinking cups, and the carbonized remains of organic materials like wine, olive oil, and grains. This surprising evidence forced a dramatic reinterpretation. These were not houses for the dead, they were venues for the living, sealed chambers designed for elite, communal feasting and libation rituals. The lack of windows and doors wasn't about sealing in the dead, but about sealing in the participants, creating a controlled environment where the sensory overload of music, dance, drink, and shared food could forge powerful social bonds among the ruling class and induce states of ecstatic connection with the gods. This single shift in interpretation, from tomb to ritual dining hall, fundamentally changes our understanding of Minoan social power, showing that exclusionary celebration could be just as important as funerary honor in the architecture of control. Each of these digs, from the bureaucratic vaults of the Hittites to the sacrificial chambers of the Chimu and the ritual dining clubs of the Minoans, provides a crucial physical piece of the puzzle. They confirm some historical theories, shatter others, and most importantly, they give us the hard evidence needed to move beyond guesswork and into the realm of informed interpretation, allowing us to hear the faint but clear whispers of the past through the objects they left locked away in the dark. So how do we make sense of all this? Were these sealed chambers purely symbolic stages for power, highly practical strongrooms, or a complex fusion of both? This is where historians and archaeologists step in, offering us different lenses through which to view these enigmatic spaces, and their debates are as fascinating as the structures themselves. One compelling perspective comes from the renowned historian of religion, Mircea Eliade, who introduced the powerful concept of the axis mundi, the world center. For Eliade, these windowless rooms weren't just buildings, they were sacred points of connection, the very navel of the world where the human realm punctured through to the divine. Imagine a temple's holy of holies not as a mere room, but as a cosmic umbilical cord. In this view, the Egyptian naos housing the god statue was a direct conduit to the gods, the Minoan Lustral basin a symbolic return to the womb of the earth, and the Maya king's burial chamber a portal to the underworld. The seclusion was absolutely necessary because you cannot have a vulnerable, chaotic opening to another plane of existence. It must be a controlled, singular, and protected puncture point. The architecture's primary function, through this lens, was to make this cosmic geography physically real, to create a fixed point of order in the chaos of the universe where communication with the divine could be safely and effectively managed. On the other side of the theoretical spectrum, we have procedural archaeologists like Colin Renfrew, who urge us to look beyond the symbolic and focus on the practical, socio-economic functions. Renfrew would argue that while the symbolism is compelling, we cannot ignore the sheer material practicality of these structures. A windowless room is, first and foremost, an incredibly effective storage container and a symbol of controlled redistribution. The Inca Kolka, the Persian treasury, the Hittite tablet archives, these were the central banks and server farms of the ancient world. The power they represented was not just spiritual but intensely material. Controlling access to grain, precious metals, and administrative records was the very engine of the state. This perspective doesn't dismiss the sacred but sees it as intertwined with the economic. The ruler's ability to perform his divine role was contingent on his control of these resources. His claim to be the intermediary who ensured the harvest was proven by his literal control over the grain silos. The sealed room, therefore, is the physical manifestation of a political economy, a tool for managing scarcity, rewarding loyalty, and preventing the kind of uncontrolled access that could lead to economic instability or challenge the central authority. It was a highly rational solution to the practical problems of power, but the most satisfying approach is likely a synthesis of these views, recognizing that for ancient peoples, these categories were not separate. The symbolic was practical. A king's spiritual authority directly enabled his economic control, and vice versa. The pharaoh's ability to command the labor to build a pyramid, a massive economic and administrative undertaking, was justified by his divine status, which was in turn proven by his exclusive access to the windowless sanctuary. The two forms of power were mutually reinforcing, and the architecture served both masters simultaneously. This multifaceted understanding allows us to appreciate the brilliant complexity of ancient decision-making. There was no single why. The design of a sealed chamber could answer a dozen needs at once. It was a spiritual battery, a defensive redoubt, a climate-controlled archive, a psychological theater, and a cosmic map. To ask whether it was primarily symbolic or practical is perhaps to ask the wrong question. It was all these things, a multi-tool of power whose very strength lay in its ambiguity and its capacity to serve a multitude of purposes, both seen and unseen. Engaging with these different theoretical perspectives doesn't give us one easy answer, but it does give us a far richer set of tools to appreciate the ingenious, layered logic behind these ancient architectural wonders. It's a powerful and strangely humbling thought that this ancient impulse to create sealed spaces is not some dusty relic of history. It's alive and well, pulsating through the very devices we use every single day. We may have traded stone for silicon and torches for touchscreens, but the fundamental human drive to control access, manage information, and shape perception remains utterly unchanged. Consider your own digital life for a moment. Your smartphone is essentially a personal, pocket-sized palace, and its most powerful rooms are all sealed. The passcode or fingerprint sensor is the modern equivalent of the removed ladder from an Inca storeroom. It's a barrier that creates a hierarchy of access. Your private messages, your photo albums, your financial apps, these are your inner sanctums, your treasuries. You are, in a very real sense, the ruler of your own digital kingdom, deciding who gets an audience in your public social media courtyard and who is granted the privilege of entering your most private, encrypted chambers. This architectural thinking extends to the virtual spaces we collectively inhabit. A private Facebook group or a Discord server with strict admin controls is a direct descendant of the Assyrian king's windowless council chamber. It's a space where information is carefully curated, access is gatekept, and a specific narrative of power and community is reinforced away from the eyes of the uninitiated. Corporations wield this principle on a massive scale, housing their most valuable asset data in colossal, windowless, and heavily guarded server farms. These are the modern ziggurats, their humming halls protected by biometric scanners and firewalls instead of stone walls and armed guards, yet serving the exact same purpose: to protect the source of power from dilution, theft, or observation. We even see the ancient psychological theater play out in our user interfaces. The dark mode on our apps isn't just easier on the eyes. It's a subtle form of sensory control, limiting visual distractions to focus our attention entirely on the content the platform wants us to see, much like a torchlit chamber focusing all awe on the ruler. This reflection forces a fascinating question. If we are the ancient architects now, what sealed spaces are we building today that will leave future historians utterly baffled? They might puzzle over the cultural significance of the panic room in suburban homes, seeing it as a poignant symbol of modern anxieties. They could analyze the social stratification inherent in gated communities, the digital equivalent of a citadel's outer and inner walls. Perhaps they will study the sealed, climate-controlled data vaults buried in Arctic mountains, designed to preserve human knowledge for 10,000 years, and see them not as pragmatic archives but as our civilization's most profound attempt at achieving a kind of digital eternity, an eternal resting place for our collective soul. Recognizing this unbroken thread connecting the Pharaoh's tomb to our password manager does more than just connect the past to the present. It holds up a mirror to our own society. It reveals that our efforts to control our environment, to protect what we value, and to manage how we are perceived are not modern inventions but deeply ingrained human behaviors. We are still building rooms with no doors and windows. We've just learned to construct them out of code and light. Despite our incredible journey into the logic and symbolism of these sealed spaces, the truth is that many of history's most tantalizing doors remain firmly shut. For every mystery we solve, a dozen more deepen, proving that the ancient world still guards its most intimate secrets with a fierce determination. Take the seemingly simple question of air. How did occupants breathe during lengthy rituals in a room buried under millions of tons of stone, like the king's chamber in the Great Pyramid? We know of the narrow shafts, but were they truly sufficient? Or did the ancient engineers employ a lost understanding of convection, perhaps using carefully controlled fires to create a draft that pulled stale air out and drew fresh air in through hidden channels we have yet to discover? The absence of soot or evidence for such systems only deepens the puzzle, suggesting ventilation techniques so subtle they have left no trace after millennia. Then there are the chambers whose very purpose remains a subject of fierce, thrilling debate. The Minoan, Lustral basins of Crete are a perfect example. For decades, the prevailing theory held that these sunken, windowless rooms were used for purification rites, but recent scholarship has challenged this, with some archaeologists pointing out a lack of drainage systems that would be essential for liquid-based rituals. This has sparked a new wave of speculation. Were they instead storage rooms for sacred objects, their sunken design a symbolic descent into the earth's power? Could they have been small, private theaters for ritual performances, where the enclosed space amplified the sound of chanting and the footsteps of dancers, creating an immersive experience for a select few? Without a written record from the Minoans themselves, each new artifact uncovered forces us to reconsider everything we thought we knew. This relentless pursuit of answers is what makes archaeology a living, breathing science, not a static record of the past. The detective story continues with every technological breakthrough. Ground-penetrating radar and LiDAR are now our torches, illuminating hidden chambers without ever lifting a trowel. In the jungles of Guatemala, LiDAR has recently revealed vast, unknown networks of Maya palaces and temples completely swallowed by the rainforest, their innermost rooms waiting to tell their stories. In Egypt, muon tomography, a technique that uses cosmic rays to see through stone, is being used to probe the Great Pyramid for hidden voids, suggesting that even our most famous ancient wonder may still hold undiscovered, sealed spaces. Each scan, each new digital map, is like finding a fresh set of blueprints for a civilization we only thought we understood. These ongoing mysteries are not frustrating gaps in our knowledge, they are the very engine of discovery. They remind us that history is not a book to be memorized but a vast, interactive puzzle. Every unanswered question is an invitation, a challenge to look closer, think deeper, and question our assumptions. The sealed chambers of the ancient world continue to whisper, and as our tools for listening become more sophisticated, we edge ever closer to hearing their full, incredible stories, ensuring that the conversation between the past and the present never truly ends. From the symbolic womb chambers of Indian temples to the strategic war rooms of Norse chieftains, the story of the windowless room is a profound testament to human ingenuity in the face of a universal challenge: how to handle that which is most powerful. These spaces were far more than architectural quirks. They were masterpieces of psychological engineering, environmental control, and social theater. They controlled the flow of information as deftly as they controlled the flow of air, and they shaped human perception as intentionally as they shaped stone. By exploring their functions across disconnected cultures, we uncover a stunning universal language of authority, a grammar of power written not in words but in space, darkness, and controlled access. This journey reveals that architecture is never neutral. It is not a passive backdrop for human drama but an active participant, a silent partner in the project of power that can intimidate, inspire, isolate, or unite. The stone walls of an ancient palace were a technology as sophisticated as any smartphone, designed to direct attention, manage resources, and broadcast an ideology of divine right and unassailable control without ever uttering a single word. These ancient builders understood something we are only now rediscovering in the digital age, that the environment we create, in turn, creates us. It shapes our behavior, reinforces our beliefs, and defines the boundaries of our society. The Pharaoh in his darkened naus, the Inca emperor in his solstice-aligned chamber, the Assyrian king in his oppressive audience hall, they all used architecture as a deliberate tool to craft a specific reality for their subjects, one where their authority felt as natural and immutable as the walls themselves. As we leave this exploration behind, consider the modern spaces you inhabit. How does the layout of your office, the design of your home, or the architecture of your digital platforms influence your thoughts, your interactions, and your sense of place in the world? Are you living in a modern mead hall, a sacred sanctum, or a sealed treasury? The principles of environmental psychology that ancient rulers intuited are still at play all around us, working silently to shape our lives. If you've enjoyed this deep dive into the hidden language of ancient power, consider subscribing for more journeys into the past that help us understand our present. And we would love to hear from you in the comments below. What other architectural mystery or ancient wonder should we explore together next? Your curiosity is what fuels this channel, and your suggestions become our next great adventure. Thank you for watching.